I'm an addict. My name is Jonathan.
We're going to do this a little weird. We're both going to do a lead-in, and I'm doing the odds, and he's doing the evens. And we're just going to go back and forth. Quiet. I'm the odd one.
I'm even.
I was first introduced to the traditions pretty early in my recovery. It's a story I tell all the time about. I was at a home group business meeting one time, and we had one guy that was a member of the home group that was, he had several years clean. He was up into double digits, and I had like 90 days, something like that, you know, and I was working my first step, and part of my first step was reading the first 10 chapters of the basic text, and of course one of those chapters is the traditions, and that was just happened to be where I was at. And he was trying to ramrod something through the home group and use his opinion and his prestige, I guess, because he had the most clean time. And I piped up and said something about, well, you know, the tradition says that our leaders are but trusted servants, they don't govern, and that we have one voice, and that's God, and nobody should push it through. And he told me I needed to talk to my sponsor about that shit, that was just, I need to work the steps before I did the traditions. And I talked to my sponsor at the time about it, and he said, no, that's a crock of shit. If you're that interested in the traditions, let's go there and let's do this. You know, so with my first sponsor, I kind of worked the traditions and the steps hand in hand. It's never too early to start the traditions. The steps is what keeps me from killing myself, and the traditions are what keeps me from killing everybody else, or everybody else killing me. So that's my little lead into them. I think they're very important. There's one line I want to say. It's at the end of Tradition 1. We must live and work together as a group to ensure that in a storm our ship does not sink and our members do not perish. With faith and a power greater than ourselves, hard work, and unity, we will survive and continue to carry the message to the addict who still suffers. Your turn.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan. I'm an addict. I'm very, very grateful to be here today, and even more grateful just to be alive. I want to thank the programming committee for asking me to speak with this workshop. The traditions are very important to me, and I've actually gone to many meetings where people are like not excited about going to a tradition meeting. It's like, yeah. And I really enjoy tradition meetings. What happened was I started going to a home group that was very, very, very weak. It had just really was just a couple addicts that kind of got together and didn't know what they were doing, breaking all sorts of traditions. And we learned as a home group over the years, one by one, that we had to work the traditions or the home group would not stay stable. And so as I go through the different traditions, I want to explain how we first screwed it up, and then we came to a conclusion that we had to, in fact, work the tradition, and how it made our home group stronger. We started with 7 meetings a week, one every day of the week, and now we're down to 3. And what we do is we have a basic text study on one day, which includes the steps and the traditions, and we have It Works How and Why literature study on another day, which includes the steps and traditions, and then there's one open discussion. So we go through the traditions in 2 different meetings, and even the most hardened people who think that the traditions aren't worth studying eventually realize the necessity of understanding and applying the traditions.
Tradition 1. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on NA unity. As far as recovery is concerned, my first experience with that tradition was I have a cousin who belongs to another fellowship, and he's got many years clean, and he invited me to one of their meetings. And my sponsor asked me, like, how are you going to identify yourself when you get there? I don't know, because I'm a believer that If you identify as anything other than an addict in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, you're violating our first tradition, because part of our unity is we're all addicts once we walk in here. Anything else is just something else. It's not a Narcotics Anonymous thing. And by this time, I was pretty into the traditions, and you know, back then people called us Nazis, but I think that's a derogatory term. I prefer to call them traditionalists, and it's those of us that believe in the traditions enough to enforce them in meetings. When we see that something's going wrong or something's violating our traditions, we should speak up, just as members in general. There's been a couple cases when I've done that, and I've really pissed some people off because of the other traditions down the line that we'll get to, but it's enforcing that unity. You know, it's important that us as members with some clean time and some experience stick to those and stand up for those things that we know to be right. Otherwise, the message starts getting watered down, and I don't know about you, but Narcotics Anonymous has saved my life time and time and time again. And I don't want the message to be watered down at all. I like a crisp, clean, clear Narcotics Anonymous message. That's what I want to hear. So the unity is very important to me. Part of the traditions is applying these principles in all of our affairs. So let's just pick work. The unity part of that, I can apply that at work. I can apply that at family. You know, if I don't believe that the family unit as a whole is important, my personal life depends on the family unity, or my paycheck every week depends on the company remaining stable. You know, so that unity, that sense of one purpose, is important in all areas of my life. Work, family, friends, pals. You know, there's a group of us that are pretty tight, and each of us will help each other because we're stronger as a whole than we are as individuals. All of us are like that, and at some point in our lives we depend on each other. You know, so that unity is real important, can be applied in a whole lot of ways. And it says, this is not to say that we do not have disagreements or conflicts. We do. Anytime people get together, there's differences of opinions and things. So that unity doesn't mean that only one person is doing the thinking. It just means that everybody involved needs to realize that the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, I guess is the best way to put that. You know, and I guess that's all I got on Tradition 1.
Tradition 2 is, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. In my home group, I have the most amount of clean time, which meant for a year no one had a year. And so we really did struggle with all of these different traditions and with trying to get the home group organized and planned so that it could be a place that you knew was going to be open at a certain time and that there was going to be a meeting. And I have a master's degree in business, so my whole idea was that when I started, my idea was that it's this pyramid like it is in business, you know, where you work your way up and you work your way up and you work your way up, and then somebody's in charge. And so authority is downward driven, and that's exactly the opposite of what's true in Narcotics Anonymous. The authority lies within the group conscience, and so the authority lies within the group. The structure of NA, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but is an upside down pyramid with the groups at the top because they hold all the power. And every level that's different than that is answerable to the group above them. So our area is answerable to the groups, our region is answerable to the area. In other words, we truly are, if we're in a service position, we're truly a trusted servant. We're a servant. We're not there to control or to manage other things. And I have to admit that I was the worst offender of this tradition, and I have to keep going back to this tradition because I keep wanting, I think of the group as my home group. It's not my home group. It's a home group that I go to. You know, it's a group that I go to. And I tend to try to fix, manage, and control the group. In the early years, there were several of us, I'll say 4 or 5 of us, who were really strong-willed, strongly opinionated people. And our home group meetings were, I mean, there were times when people walked out. That's not a group conscience. We had times when there were votes that went 4-3, and because it was 4 people who voted to one way, then that's what we were going to do. That's not a group conscience. And it took us a while to finally come to a place that that we could rely on our higher power working through the individuals to come together to form this group conscience. In the basic text, it talks about how the group conscience is really kind of a two-sided sword, because one of the issues that comes up is that a group conscience is not the same as the group opinion necessarily, because there's a few people who are very strongly opinionated and can really manipulate and convince people, persuade people that they're right, and it may not be, in fact, following other traditions. And so we have to be very careful that we don't violate other traditions by just going along with the majority of the people. We have to make sure that we're all individually trying to further the common purpose of the primary purpose of the group. You know, when I got here, I had no idea what God was. No idea. And I have, in the years since I've been here, have developed an understanding of what God is. And every time I think I've got a hold of it, and this is in the basic text, it works how and why. It talks about once you think you've defined God, you've lost it, you know, and you've got to start over again. And that's kind of what just happened to me in my life. But I do know that He works through the group in a group conscience when we get together and we talk about the issues, and we always go back to what our primary purpose is and whether it's helping to carry the message. And again, the last part is that our leaders are but trusted servants. You know, we don't govern, we don't manage. Somebody who's in service is answerable to the people that elected them, not the other way around. And that's an important thing to remember. And with that, tradition 3.
The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. That's a good thing. You know, in one of the previous versions of the basic text, it used to say an honest desire to stop using. Now, I don't know who the judge was that judged if you had an honest desire to stop or not, but I'm really grateful that there's not one. You remember when you say you are. Pretty much, if you want to join this fellowship and become a part of this fellowship, and you have a desire to stop using, whether you have the ability to do that or not, you can be a member of Narcotics Anonymous. That's real important, because for a lot of us, it's real difficult to stop using. And some of us need to go out and do a little more research before we finally grasp it. Some of us don't. You know, I'm one of the fortunate ones that hasn't had to use since my first meeting in Narcotics Anonymous. relapse is not a requirement, but it is a reality, and it happens a lot. I'm grateful that there is only that one requirement, and because of that one requirement, that allows people from all walks of life, all sexual orientations or races, creeds, colors, whatever, any of it. I mean, all you got to do is look around this room, and there's a whole lot of different kind of people in here, you know. But the one commonality that brings us all together, and it's really cool how all these traditions tie into each other. You know, I mean, the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop using, and that's good because that creates some unity in all of us. It's because all of us have that same desire. To apply that outside, to apply that to other areas of my life means that I don't judge. Somebody real early in my recovery told me that people who judge don't matter, and people who matter don't judge. You know, and that's one of those little quips that really stuck with me. It's not up to me to judge who my friends are, or judge my friends. If they're my friends, I take them for what they are. I take them for face value. It's all about unconditional love. You know, I wasn't able to choose my parents or my siblings, you know, and I don't have to like them, you know, but I need to love them because they're a part of my family, and they're a part of my friends, and it's just, this tradition helps me to not judge people and take them for face value and take them for who they are, and embrace. It took me a while to do this, but embrace the differences as well as the similarities, you know, because if we were all alike, it would be a really boring place, you know. And it's our differences, it's our differences that help bring us together and help keep us together. Because of this tradition, there is no, if you don't work the 12 steps in the first 2 years you're in here, you're kicked out, you know, or if you don't do a step a month for, you know, then you're kicked out, or if you don't do this, then you're kicked out, or you can't be a member of Narcotics Anonymous unless you do blah blah blah. That's really good, and that allows us the freedom, and it allows people to do what they feel necessary to do for their own recovery, and it allows for, there's no, this is the way you do it, period. You know, I've been through the steps a couple of different times, and each time I've gone through them, I've done them a little differently. Each time an event comes up in my life, what used to work back when may or may not work today. So it allows for growth and change, and we as human beings are pretty much in a constant state of flux, because events in our lives happen, things happen in our lives that create change, and we're able to adapt to that. And if it weren't for this tradition and applying this tradition in all areas of my life, I would be in a rut, and I wouldn't be able to roll with the punches, and I wouldn't be able to grow with the changes, and I probably wouldn't be able to face some of the bad things that happen in my life, you know, and still stay clean and recover. And I guess that's all I got for that.
Tradition 4 is each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or NA as a whole. As Paul had just said, the traditions actually often work together, and this is one of the ones that often is in conjunction with another tradition. So when when a group violates a tradition, let's say that they endorse their clubhouse that they meet in, that reflects on other groups and NA as a whole. First of all, the definition of autonomous is having the right or the power of self-government. So being autonomous means we can make our own decisions. We can have the group the way we want to have our home group. We have the format we want to have regardless if anybody else has ever had that format before. And we can meet at times that is convenient for our community. It could be that our entire community is people who are service oriented, and at the times that they're available is after midnight. We could have a meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning. But this tradition says that the one thing we have to watch out for is that we don't reflect badly on the fellowship as a whole or on other groups. So our home group, when I first got there, we ended the meeting with the Lord's Prayer. I am convinced, other people may not agree with me, but I'm convinced that that is a violation of tradition because it does endorse a specific religion. And we also, during the meeting, we gave announcements that had to do with our clubhouse, which is called the YANA Club, Y-A-N-A. It stands for You Are Never Alone. There's actually NA groups that are called that. But this is our clubhouse, which was originally started with the other fellowship, with the AA fellowship, and it is not proper to be giving announcements and endorsements during an NA meeting for any outside issue. So, because when people come to the meeting, if they come to a meeting and someone is talking for a long period of time and perhaps even reading out of the Bible or reading out of a book that's another fellowship, which has happened, both of them in our home group, the newcomers coming in are going to think, well, that's what the meetings are about. That's what NA is about. And that does, in fact, reflect on NA as a whole and on other home groups. We have to be very careful that whatever we do decide doesn't reflect badly on the fellowship or reflect on different home groups and or the fellowship as a whole. Kind of a secondary major piece of what the traditions are all about is in order to keep the fellowship alive and keep the fellowship growing and keep it healthy. And this tradition really helps in that regard.
Number 5, each group has but one primary purpose: to carry the message to the addict who still suffers. For me, that's all about, it tells me that it's all about helping each other stay clean. It's not about who has the best meeting facility, who has the most cookouts, who can put on the biggest picnic. Our primary purpose is to carry the message to the addict who still suffers. And that addict who still suffers can be a person with 2 days clean or a person with 20 years clean. We all go through, like I said earlier, we all go through changes and have life happens to us, and at any point in our recovery we can become that suffering addict. This allows us to focus on carrying the Narcotics Anonymous message rather than reupholstering our chairs or improving our clubhouse or getting a pop machine. Or I have seen groups that compete like that for who has the best meeting facility, and I don't think that it's done intentionally, but it becomes about and it says that we're about attraction rather than promotion, but I don't think that's what they mean by attraction. Is, we have movie night every night or whatever, it's It's not about that. It's about carrying a message. And while we, and by group, I believe that it's not just talking about meeting type groups. It's talking about all levels of service. It's talking about the area level, it's talking about the regional level and the world level, that our primary purpose as a fellowship is to help carry the message. At the world level, it's about translating text, our basic text, into other languages so other people can get this, and instead of just English speaking people, you know, I mean, and they've translated into I don't know how many different languages now, and it's really cool. At the regional level, it's important to have things like committees are important. Hospitals and institutions or public information, those kind of committees are real important because it helps get the message to suffering addicts who have no other means to get the message. You know, if it wasn't for public information and these public announcement spots that they have every once in a while and stuff, maybe the message would have never gotten out to some people. You know, those things are important. Our phone line. I can travel anywhere in the United States and look up in the phone book, and if I can't find Narcotics Anonymous in the phone book, the odds are that I can call a hospital and a hospital can guide me to a meeting. You know, without public information and the hospitals and institutions and those committees that are about getting the information out and getting that message out to help the still suffering addicts, I couldn't do that. And there's times when I'm in another town and I need a meeting pretty bad because just some shit's going down or whatever, and I'm able to find one because of that. And you know, part of this is not just carrying a message in groups or in regions or at the world level or whatever. It's about carrying it as individuals as well. You know, at work or in my family, outside of my fellowship, I tried to live my life and to where people can see that my life has changed, especially my family, because they saw me what I was like before, and they see the way I live my life now, and they know that there's been some major changes in that, and I can carry that message to the addict who still suffers, even though that addict might be my brother or my sister or a cousin or something like that. And it happens at work, and I've had people at work come up to me and just ask me, you know, how do you not react when somebody says, "Fuck you, Paul"? How do you not just go off on them? You know, and then I can explain them that. And it's through these principles that I've learned how not to react to situations like that. That's carrying a message to the addict who still suffers. Even they might not even realize that they are an addict. You know, but I'm carrying a message by doing that. And this tradition ties into some traditions that are down the line, in that some of us put bumper stickers all over our cars and everything, and we still drive like assholes. You know, and that's not a good message to carry. You know, we have to be aware of that. And our public information as individual addicts, how we act when we're wearing a recovery t-shirt, or how we drive when our cars are plastered with bumper stickers and everything, and we're still cutting people off or slamming on our brakes when we're tailgated or something like that. You know, it doesn't reflect well on the fellowship as a whole. We need to remember as individuals as well that our primary purpose is to stay clean and carry that message to the addict who still suffers.
Tradition 6 is, in any group ought never endorse, finance, or lend any name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, or prestige divert us from our primary purpose. And again, in my home group, because I have to really talk about my experience, strength, and hope, I have to give my experience, and that is, in fact, that Narcotics Anonymous at our home group used to make announcements for the Yana Club. In fact, that statement of what's going on at the club is an implied endorsement of the clubhouse that we meet at. They also, in their mission statement, wanted to include that this was a place for 12-step recovery programs, including AA, NA, Al-Anon, da-da-da-da-da. And they finally left out that including phrase, again, because we don't want to be affiliated. We're not affiliated at all with the place that we meet. If that place burns down to the ground, we should be able to find another place and have our meeting absolutely without a hitch the same time, the next time a meeting is due. And this one actually is very important, and we struggled with it a lot because there's actually clipboards on our tables that have announcements about what's going on at the club and announcements that's going on in different organizations and different fellowships. And so we had to make sure that we're not endorsing any other group or any other, like I said, a clubhouse. Another way to endorse is to actually have somebody to read passages from particular literature or books that's not our fellowship. It's not approved literature for our fellowship. So people will read from what they consider to be and this has happened in our home group. They started reading what they considered to be something that was spiritually uplifting, but it was in fact from a spiritual book. And we can't endorse that author. We can't endorse that religion. We can't endorse that organization. If we did, we'd let ourselves open for a lot of different controversies. And again, that ties into the 9th tradition, I think it is, where, let's see, no, it's the, but I'm just saying that we, over the years, we've decided that we had to stop doing what we had been doing, and our home group is stronger now because we don't do anything that really, or try not to do anything that really endorses any other organizations, any clubhouses, any places that we meet, or any other organizations, any religions, any groups. And it's for the safety of our group and for the safety of the fellowship itself, again, in order to keep the fellowship alive and free and moving forward.
Number 7, this is the money one. Every NA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. That's a hell of a concept, man. Support ourselves. You know, in active addiction, I did whatever means necessary to support me, and the less I had to do it myself, the better it was. You know, and today, by me being self-supporting, it gives me a great sense of freedom, because I have no one to answer to but me. You know, I earn my paycheck, I pay my bills. It gives me a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride, and like I said, a sense of freedom. As far as the group supporting itself, Tradition 6 led right into that, because if we allow as a group somebody else to help support us, then more often than not they would expect some kind of advertisement or endorsement or something from that. You know, if we go into like a treatment facility and there's a meeting in the treatment facility and that treatment facility pays our rent or buys our books or something like that, then they would expect some kind of endorsement because they're paying for it, and that's only right. By us being self-supporting, that gives us the freedom to apply Tradition 6. And we don't have to endorse or lend our name to anything else. Because just like me paying my own bills, we as a group only have to answer to ourselves then. If we pay for it for ourselves. Now, the paying for it part. When this fellowship started over 50 years ago, people were putting $1 in the basket. You know, today, 50 years later, when $1 in the 50s was probably worth close to a 20 now. I'm just guessing. I'm not a mathematician or anything, or yeah, one of those. It's a lot. There's a huge difference, you know, and it's unsettling to me when I see someone come into a meeting with a $5 cup of coffee and they don't put anything in the basket. It's like, what the hell, man? Don't buy the coffee and put the $5 in the basket. You know, because I don't know about you, but if you're an addict like me, this is what keeps me clean. You know? And I heard an addict say one time, if you're driving a Lexus, you should be ashamed if you put anything less than a 10 in the basket. You know, it's all proportional. You know, I know that I spent way more than $1 or $2 in my active addiction. Way more. It was nothing for me to drop a $50 bill. You know, and never even think twice about it. It would greatly improve at the world level and the regional level, carrying the message to the addict who still suffers, if we as individuals helped pay for that, because that's where the funding comes from. World doesn't have advertising, or they don't do big promotions or anything like that. All that money that the world gets to the money that it costs to translate the text so that people in third world countries can find recovery as easy as us, comes from us. You know, and that's important. If our primary purpose is to carry the message to the addict who still suffers, then dig a little deeper so we can do that. Most areas have fundraisers, you know, and things like that, to raise funds, and they have to do that to generate more funds so that they can have committees and buy the supplies they need to carry the message. The cost of buying basic text and getting them into the jails, or supplying literature and getting it into, like, in our area we do a JJC, a Juvenile Justice Center thing, and we buy literature and put it into there so these kids can get recovery, and they don't have to go through the crap that most of us went through for 30 years. They only have to do it for 5. You know, and I can't imagine what my life would be like if I got clean at 18. Funding is important. You know, there's a whole lot of things involved in this tradition. The bottom line, though, is being self-supporting and being self-sufficient. You know, and if we as individual addicts can truly look at ourselves and know that we've given it all that we can give or all that we can afford, because to be honest with you, I've got bills today, and because I'm self-supporting and maybe I can't afford to put $5 in the basket every week, you know, but if I can, I do. And I do what I can when I can, you know, and us as individual addicts are the only ones who know that, because we're the only ones that know what goes on in our own heads. I guess that's it. Number 8.
Number 8 is Narcotics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but as service centers may employ special workers. What this is really talking about is that a member is a member regardless of what they do for a living, as long as they have the desire to stop using. So we have members who are truant officers or work release officers or drug addiction specialists, doctors and nurses, but in Narcotics Anonymous, everyone truly is equal, and that gets into the 12th tradition, where it talks about anonymity. True anonymity means that we're all equal, regardless for the amount of time that we have, whether we have 2 days or 20 years, and regardless of what we do for a living. Someone who is a drug addiction counselor or someone in the court system or in the medical profession has no more authority, needs no more respect than anyone else does. Everyone is equal in the program. We actually tried to start a meeting that was going through the STEP Working Guide, and we looked at someone who was an addiction counselor as someone who could help us go through the STEP Working Guide. And after about one meeting, it was obvious that it wasn't going to work well, and did not work well at all. And it's really a bad situation, as a matter of fact. The STEP Working Guide isn't meant for that, and it's certainly not meant for a professional to tell you what the answers are. You know, it's truly from within. I mean, it was a silly idea to even start it. But it says our service centers may employ special workers, and that just means that there's people who do things professionally for a living, and they might need to get paid, but they're not within the fellowship, you know, or they're special workers to get something accomplished for the good of the group. For example, we needed to have the posters framed so we could put them on the wall, and we paid someone to frame the posters so we could put them up. You know, so we employed a special worker in that case, and so it talks about how those special workers have special skills that are needed at some point, and oftentimes that's within a committee. For example, phone answering service we would hire, or someone to make a sign that we would have for public information, or someone who would make a tape that would be for public information on the TV. And again, that's what Tradition 8 is about. I can tell you that we did have one person come to our meetings who was a probation officer, and boy, you talk about a meeting attendance plunging. Yeah, that was terrible. That was bad. You know, and like everybody came in and they didn't want to talk about relapse because they knew that she was a probation officer and their probation officer. And I tell you, we struggled with that because everybody has a right to be at the meeting. And the way we handled it was, I asked her to go to another meeting. You know, the catchment area, the area of that is around our home group, brings in the addicts from our home group. Those would be her clients. It was up to her as a recovering addict to go somewhere else to find recovery, because people were not comfortable with that, and I can't blame them at all. Like I said, certainly we had addicts who I know relapsed and couldn't talk about it, and that was a pretty bad situation. She's still around and she's still in recovery, but she does go to a different home group now. And I didn't mean to, you know, we didn't throw her out of the home group, but it was obvious that the home group wouldn't survive.
And we just haphazardly showed up in places and talked to each other. That's when NA would really become unorganized. You know, so it's like a necessary evil, you know, but there are no governors. This is not a government structure. It's not a corporate structure, so there's no presidents or vice presidents or managers, or although some of us might try to fill those positions, there really aren't those positions available. And rather than the individuals being responsible to those committees are responsible to the individuals. It's exactly the opposite of a corporate structure, which is if it's working the way it's supposed to work, is really a good thing. Applying that to areas outside of this fellowship, it goes back to tradition 1 in a big way for me, in that the common welfare depends on our unity and how well we work together, you know, as a team, as the whole, to salvage whatever else, you know. And as a parent, I won't say that I'm responsible to my kids, but I'm responsible to my kids, you know, only because a 2-year-old has no clue what's best for him. However, his needs should come first. My kids' needs should come first. My primary purpose in that unit is to help him out, carry the message, so to speak, to help out my children and help them be the best person that they can be as an adult. I mean, that's what I'm doing, is I'm training them for adulthood, you know, and that's how that works. And so you can take any of these and apply them in our personal or professional lives, and all it takes is just a little bit of thought and maybe a little bit of twist to it, and you can do that. Number 10.
Number 10 is Narcotics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the NA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. I like this one. On September 12th of 2001, somebody came into the meeting and wanted to talk about the Twin Towers in New York City. And our whole meeting was about the feelings and emotions that we had to go through. But as a group, that was as an individual going through emotional changes and emotional feelings. And We all were at that time, if we remember back. But as a group, we don't take any position, even if it's the one that's not controversial. You know, you hear every now and then about any sanctioned meetings. There's sanctioned meetings and there's non-sanctioned meetings. And non-sanctioned meetings, I think this needs to be said now, I guess, is ones that don't necessarily follow the traditions. There are you know, groups that are Christian NA groups or Muslim NA groups. There's groups that are right to life groups. There's groups that are pro-choice groups, but they're not NA groups because we take no position on any outside issue, and how an outside issue is defined. For me, I've often had to sit down and pray about it to figure out, is this really an outside issue? But you can see the problem is that if we take a position, let's say we're going to take a pro-choice position, well, anyone who's pro-life would say, well, I don't want to belong to them because I'm pro-life regardless of the fact that I'm, you know, dying from addiction. We're not a Democratic group or a Republican group. We take no opinion on the war. We don't work on campaigns. And that, again, is to protect the fellowship and to make sure that we can draw the most people that we possibly can draw through attraction by not closing doors off to people who disagree with the positions that we would be taking that have nothing to do with our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to carry the message. And that message is that an addict, any addict, can stop using drugs, lose the desire to use, and find a new way to live. That's the only issue that we're concerned with. Anything else is an outside issue. Not only would it push people away from joining Narcotics Anonymous, but it also might actually draw us into public controversy. If we take a side on an issue and, you know, with YouTube and all that happening now, it would take no time at all before it's on the internet and possibly on the news. They find some of the most bizarre cases to put on the news nowadays, and it would go right into a public controversy because we've taken a stand on something that is not our place to take a stand on. I don't know if our home group actually has done that, although I'm sure we have, because we violated all the traditions. We really did. We learned every one of these the hard way. It's like, well, let's try this, and then, you know, we break our arms, and then it's like, well, no, I don't think we ought to do that, and then, well, let's try this, and we really did. If you read Miracles Happen, it talks about how Narcotics Anonymous started without the traditions, and they found out that they had to have them because people were doing things that weren't according to traditions, and it caused damage to the group, it caused damage to the fellowship. And so I'm sure that this is one of them we did violate. I do know that several times religion was brought in, and religion is in fact an outside issue. We have a higher power, but we're a spiritual group, not a religious group. And again, it's okay to talk individually how we feel of our spiritual connection to our higher power and what our higher power is, and maybe even talk about how we've defined our higher power. But it's not the place of the group to do so, and it's not the place of any level of Narcotics Anonymous to do so, or the fellowship. And that way we can continue to grow. And the next one's 11.
Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. we don't advertise, per se. We don't go out and try to sell Narcotics Anonymous because it will make you more sexy. You know, we don't we don't try to sell Narcotics Anonymous because if you get clean in Narcotics Anonymous, in 5 years you will have a 40-hour-a-week job and make $20 an hour and have 2.3 kids and a 4-bedroom house with a white picket fence. That's really a good thing. It's based on attraction. It's based on how we present ourselves, and again, this goes back to one of the other traditions that I talked about. It's based on how we present ourselves to society and to each other that we become attractive, in that I want what he's got. You know, I want to be able to not react to situations. I want to be able to not feel the need to run up on somebody else's ass and honk on my horn and flip them off and scream and shout at them because they changed lanes when they shouldn't have. You know, I want to be able to become the type of person, and Narcotics Anonymous does not promise this. It promises us that we will become free from active addiction. And because of that freedom, we can become the type of people who can maintain a job and get promoted and be able to save some money and buy stuff. You know, we can become productive members of society. And because of that, it's attractive to those of us that have not got there yet, that are still struggling to figure out that they can be self-supporting, and are still struggling to figure out that the things that we have already figured out, living on the park bench or whatever, to extreme you need to carry it, that I want what he's got. You know, that's what it's about. The second part of this is that, and they made a press statement before this workshop started, you know, if any of us as individuals are approached by the media, we need to direct them to someone on the committee, because us as individuals don't need to get involved in that. People will take that. If I went on the radio and I told them what my opinions were, and then told them that I was a member of Narcotics Anonymous, the public at large may take that as the Narcotics Anonymous opinion, when it has absolutely nothing to do with Narcotics Anonymous. That's my opinion. That's why we need to maintain personal anonymity. If I'm being interviewed at work for something, and I somehow say, well, yeah, I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous and blah, 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 then all of a sudden Narcotics Anonymous has other affiliations. They're affiliated with my place of business, they're affiliated with whatever I'm being interviewed for, you know, and things like that. It's important that we keep that private at the level of press, radio, and films. You know, in the news today, there's so many Hollywood personalities that are going into recovery and stuff like that, okay? And if they were to say, I got clean in Narcotics Anonymous, and then 3 months later they're in rehab again for something like that, then the message to the public is that Narcotics Anonymous don't work. Right? That's why this is important. You know, even though we as individuals know that there are professionals that are clean and they do go to Narcotics Anonymous and they are members of our fellowship, we just know that as individuals because we're part of that fellowship. They don't advertise it to the media. you know, they don't get up on stage and say, hey, I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous and this is my latest song. You know, and that's important for the reasons that I just gave, because if anything happens, and life happens to us, I mean, there's people with lots and lots and lots of years clean that, for whatever reason, find it necessary to go back out. If that message is out to the public and the public sees that, hey, he's a member of Narcotics Anonymous, then we don't want that to get out, that this shit don't work, because we had that stigma for too long anyways, that there is no clean time in Narcotics Anonymous. That went on for a long time. Well, there's lots of clean time in Narcotics Anonymous. I'm looking around the room and there's, I don't know a lot of yous, but just the people that I know, there's a lot of fucking clean time in here, man. You know, and that's really cool, because we do recover. But as individuals, we can't project that to the media. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for the fellowship, and it's dangerous for ourselves. You know, I mean, as an individual, if I went to the media and told them how I got clean in Narcotics Anonymous and then my life has done this and this and this and this and this, I mean, my ego would probably, I already have an ego problem, and it would just get even bigger, you know. The public relations policy based on attraction rather promotion, that also goes back to what I said earlier, is that we need to be ever mindful that we are representatives of Narcotics Anonymous in the public eye if we advertise that. If we're out there wearing recovery t-shirts and we're out there and have bumper stickers all over our cars and everything, we need to be mindful of that and act accordingly. Which brings us to number 12.
Number 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. I finally get a really fun one. He had all the good ones.
Goes on my heart.
That's right. Most of the steps and most of the traditions have two halves, and this is another one that has two halves. The first part talks about anonymity as the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. And in the It Works How and Why, it actually goes through every single step, 1 through 11 and 12, and talks about how anonymity in fact, is the underpinning, the actual spiritual foundation for each of the traditions. And that's really important. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as an example, the unity from the first tradition is because we're all the same. We're anonymous. It really, truly doesn't matter what we look like, what we do for a living, whether we're gay or straight, what race we are, how much money we make, nothing. We're all the same in the program. The same is true for the third tradition when it talks about the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. You know, again, it doesn't matter where we come from. It doesn't matter what drugs we did. That the ultimate authority is the loving higher power. You know, no one in any position has authority over the group. No one is better than, you know, and nobody is less than. And this goes back to one of the major things that I've learned in recovery, which is that I've learned, it's hard to believe this, but I've learned at least the definition of humility. And I've learned that because humility really means that I have a realistic view of the consequences of my actions. I have a realistic view of when I do something, what the consequences are. When I do something right, I haven't saved the world from calamity. I haven't, made the world peace and fed the hungry in Africa. And if I do something wrong, I haven't destroyed Western civilization. And that's the way we think about it when we get here. That's certainly the way I thought about it when I got here. And in the basic text, it talks about humility and self-loathing cannot exist in the same place. We have to get over the self-loathing that we have when we get here in order in order to become humble enough that we can be anonymous, that we can be just one more person. Because when we get here, we think there's all these other people, and then I'm the worst of the worst. I'm lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. But we're not, we really are the same as everyone else. And if we don't believe that, wait till we do a fifth step and hear from our sponsors what they have done, because chances are that I have done everything you've done, or something very close to the same thing. But anonymity is in fact the spiritual foundation of all the traditions, and a lot of that lies in the fact that we're all the same, that we're all equal, that we are all equal regardless of where we come from. The second half says, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. And we say this all the time. It's almost become a cliche, but it really is important. If I'm practicing spiritual principles of honesty and open-mindedness and willingness and hope and faith and courage and integrity, etc., it doesn't matter to me whether you have gotten clean yesterday or if you got clean 20 years ago. You're on a path, and I'm somebody who's standing on the side of that path, but it's your path to follow. You have lessons to learn at your rate of learning them, and you have lessons to learn before I learn them, and you have lessons to learn after I learn them. But your path is not something that I can dictate. And so when I walk out of a meeting, it says, part of that means that what you hear here and what you've heard here and who you see here as a trust, please leave it here. And that's true, but that's such a small part of this 12th step. It's so much more than just not talking about the people after we leave the meetings. Although one of my basic character defects is that I love to talk about people. So I've struggled with this one for years. I've gotten better at it, but I've also gotten better at the whole denial part. Well, I'm not really talking about them. I'm just, concerned. That's the best. That's my biggest denial, But that is part of it. Is leaving at the meetings what is at the meetings. But there is so much more of it, and if we place these spiritual principles that we've learned, and maybe by now you've worked all 12 steps and you've worked all 12 traditions, you actually know what those spiritual principles are. And if we apply those spiritual principles, I've never met a situation yet that if I did the right thing for the right reason and applied a spiritual principle, the outcome was just fine, because it was God's will. It may not have been mine, but it was God's will. The last thing that I wanted to say was that, after we read the traditions, in the end it talks about, as Paul was talking about, it says, by following these guidelines in our dealings with others and society at large, we avoid many problems. And that means, and I don't really have a family, I'm a flaming queen with a cat, But if you have a family, it's really important to practice these traditions of self-supporting, of unity, of inclusion, of anonymity. All those are important traditions, or in the work group, or whatever groups and organizations that you belong to. The other thing is that it says, the last statement is, it is only through understanding and application that they work. It's just like the steps. We don't just read them and memorize them, and they're suddenly, I've done the steps. First of all, we have to understand them. And that's why you've been sitting here half asleep, is to try to understand the traditions. And then we have to apply them. And that's the hard part. Just like applying the steps is the hard part. But through the understanding and application, they will work, and they'll hold the fellowship together, they'll hold our groups together, and we'll grow as a fellowship and as a community. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
I got one more little thing to add. This is probably my most favorite line in all of this. And anytime that I am privileged enough to read these at a meeting, I stress this. The 12 traditions of NA are not negotiable. They are the guidelines to keep our fellowship alive and free. The steps keep me clean. They keep me alive. The traditions is what keeps me available to come to meetings and do the steps and stay alive and stay clean.
Yeah, let's, it's tough doing workshops on the traditions at times, and I think those guys did an outstanding job. So, the one line that I love in the traditions, as soon as when you're reading them and you get done with number 12, then that word says over. And then on the back it starts out, understanding these traditions comes slowly over a period of time. Slowly. And sometimes I'll throw that word out there, slowly. Because that's a freedom that tells me that I might actually be allowed to stay around here long enough to understand these traditions. So if you don't understand them yet, please keep coming back and don't use. And let's close. We do have a workshop starting in about 10 more minutes, and the name of that workshop is having a home group, the importance of having a home group. So please stick around and participate if you choose. There's a lot of workshops and stuff going on today. So we circle up and close.
Thank you. Yeah, you did. I still think you had the better one. That last one, that was good. We ended right when we should.
It's gonna be like a major goal.
Please watch the microphone.
Yes.
Watch
the microphone.
There you go.
As long as we hug up, it don't make
Some kind of shape.
diamond sky, circle, gold.
Well, anybody can start.
We stand in a circle so that we never have to stand alone. I need a moment of silence followed by a stirring prayer for the addicts in and out of this fellowship, for the ones that are going to die tonight out there using, and for the ones that have a place in NA and don't even know it.
God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just for today, keep coming back, it works.
It won't if you don't. Man, that was sweet. That worked out great, John. It's all right, man.
Thank you so much. That was very, very educational.
Hope I didn't put everybody to sleep.
No.
Thank you.